Right. Good evening, everyone. It's really great to see everybody here. This is a very large crowd. Thank you very much for joining. Um, my name is Will Galloway, and I'm the co-chair of the lecture committee this year with Terry Peters, who unfortunately is not here, but I get to share co-hosting duties with Carlo Parente. Carlo, of course, you just saw, he was responsible for setting up the exhibition across the way. So I'd like to begin, I suppose, first this evening by acknowledging the lands on which we've all gathered. Toronto Metropolitan University sits on lands that are now known as Toronto, which have been inhabited for millennia by many Indigenous nations and peoples. It is our tradition, therefore, to begin our meetings with a land acknowledgement, which not only recognizes the enduring presence and resilience of Indigenous peoples in our area, but also as a reminder that we are all accountable to these relationships. Toronto itself is in the dish with one spoon territory, and the dish with one spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and to protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. And it is in this spirit and on behalf of our university that I welcome you all. One of the implications of the land acknowledgement is that there's a connection between people and place. And not only that the connection between people and place matters. You know, it's important. And our lecture series this year is really about finding that connection. It's in a way a gathering of multiple voices, each one offering a hint about how to deal with the city and how to work as architects, urban planners, and designers. And I would like to say that, you know, this evening we have quite an amazing guest who impressively takes the public realm to the global stage. And so we've had lots of viewpoints about what the city is, what it can be, how we engage as a community. And today we have a perspective that I would say goes beyond, and because it's much larger than what we've heard up to date. So I'm already beginning to kind of introduce the speaker, so I'm going to stop that because Carlo's actually supposed to do that. So please just give me 1 minute to give some thanks and to make a few logistical announcements before I hand off the microphone to Carlo. So this year, the DAS lecture series is sponsored by Esri, Thames Valley Brick and Tile, Diamond Schmidt Architects, and the Ontario Association of Architects. I'd like to thank all of these groups for your support and your patronage. They make this evening possible, and we're really grateful for all of that that we can do as a result of that. In terms of the schedule this evening, we will finish around 8 o'clock, approximately. Our speaker will talk for about 45, 60 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A session. As always, if I can ask you, please keep your questions and write them down if you need to until after the talk. And then when we do get to the Q&A session, please wait for the microphone to come to you. That's so that we can all hear in this room, but also so that everyone online can hear what the question is as well as the answer. Okay, so I think that's everything I have to say, so I'll pass over the microphone to Carlo.
Thanks, Will. Hi, everyone. As I mentioned during the gallery introduction, I worked for Gordon at Adrian Smith's Gordon Gill Architecture during my tenure in Chicago. So it's really my pleasure to be able to introduce Gordon once again. He was born in Jamaica and raised in Toronto, where he did his undergraduate studies in our Department of Architectural Science. He went on to pursue graduate studies in the US at the University of Texas, Arlington, and at Harvard's Graduate School of Design. In 2019, he was awarded an honorary doctorate from the University of Technology in Jamaica. His work ranges from the world's tallest building to sustainable communities and is driven by his philosophy that is a purposeful relationship between the formal design and performance. That is what he calls the language of performance, which is the basis of his practice, and form follows performance. He's the founding partner of the award-winning Adrian Smith plus Gordon Gill Architecture, or AS plus GG, a practice dedicated to the design of high-performance, energy efficient, and sustainable architecture. The practice approaches each project, regardless of size or scale, with an understanding that architecture has a unique power to influence civic life. Continuing to quote from their website, but also something that I'm used to from Gordon, that he passionately asserts. They strive to create designs that aid society, advance modern technology, and sustain the environment and inspire those around us to improve our world. Gordon's work includes the design of projects all around the world, including the first net zero skyscraper in called Pearl River Tower in Guangzhou, China, while he was an associate partner at SOM. The world's first large-scale positive energy building, Masdar headquarters, the next world's tallest building, Jeddah Tower, and most recently Al Wazil Plaza, the open space, which was the centerpiece of Expo 2020 in Dubai. He's passionate about cities and has designed master plans for cities all around the world, along with the decarbonization plans, including a plan for downtown Chicago. The list goes on and on. I encourage all of you to visit the website, look at the projects, or you can see a lot of them in our gallery that will be here until April 18th. So Gordon has also published extensively and has exhibited, lectured, and taught widely internationally. His designs have been recognized and awarded by the American Institute of Architects and architectural institutions worldwide. Just over 15 years ago, he was selected as Chicago's best emerging architect. In 2013, he was elected to the College of Fellows at the American Institute of Architects. And in 2015, the practice was ranked as the #1 firm in the United States by by Architect magazine. I'll end with the Alumni Award of Distinction that TMU awarded him just this past November. Please give a warm welcome to our guest this evening, Gordon Gill.
Wow. Thank you, Carlo, and thank you, Will. Can you hear me okay if I speak like this? Is this all right? All right. So first of all, I just want to thank TMU for having me back. It's been 40 years since I was here. And I saw some classmates today, actually, which was really great to be amongst friends and new friends. I brought too much to show you. I got a little excited and overdid it. So bear with me over the next few minutes. And I'll explain kind of a process that we have for our work and where we think our future is going as a practice. Carlo mentioned that we are an international practice. We have one office in Chicago. A lot of people think we have a huge office. Carolina knows we do not. We only have about somewhere between 50 or 60 people. We kind of grow in the summertime and then shrink back after the summer students go back to school. And we keep it that way. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about who we are, because I don't think you might know the firm. You maybe don't know the firm. We started in 2006. We were three of us, Adrian, Bob Forrest, and myself. Adrian was a design partner. Adrian retired this past August. So Bob and I are now, I'm the design partner. Bob is the management partner. Bob is from Montreal. I grew up here, as Carlo mentioned, after coming from Jamaica when I was 11 or so. No, yeah, 11, somewhere in there. So we always kid that it's run by two Canadians. So we have this American practice that's run by two Canadians. We created the firm for a couple of reasons. One was that we were doing a lot of very large scale projects at Skidmore, but we wanted to dig a little deeper on the sustainable side. The other reason we started the firm was architecture for us is not linear. It's a mess. It's a soup. It's a stew. It's organic. And we have this habit of doing things and breaking it and doing it again and breaking it. And it's very annoying to the staff. But they're very patient with us, and it's a process that we enjoy. And that's because we don't believe that we're simply going to descend from the mountaintop with the answer and get it right the first time. We also like the process of design. And we're pretty flat, I think it's fair to say. In the office, we don't really care where the ideas come from. And if you work with us, you'll find very quickly that on day one, you're in up to your neck. We don't have strata. We have roles, but we don't have strata. We don't really like preconceptions. So you'll notice that our work or our projects don't really look alike, but we do have a DNA and a process that we bring to every project. And so we hope that that helps us create an environmentally conscious, socially conscious, culturally conscious, specific solution for whoever it is or whatever it is that we're doing. We are lucky to work around the world. We do master planning. We have delivered 4 cities over the last 17 years, 2 of which are Expo cities, and we can chat about that at some point. The other 2 are expansions of cities in China, Xi'an and Tianfu. We're probably best known for these guys. We probably have 6 of the 20 world's tallest under our belt in the firm. Adrian designed Burj Khalifa, which you probably know when he was at Skidmore. We were just in Dubai and Cairo and Riyadh last couple of weeks. Kingdom, or Jeddah Tower, which is now called, is hopefully back on track. So we'll see what happens with that. Central Park Tower, which is the image on the far right, finished about a year or 18 months ago, which is now the world's tallest residential building in Manhattan with Extel. And we have a host of buildings. I snuck 160 Front Street in there, as you can tell, not a super tall necessarily, but certainly near and dear to our hearts. What people don't know about us is that we do a whole scale of projects, from parks to pavilions to theaters. And we enjoy that process. And what we do is, in the office, we rotate staff off of projects. Once they live through a project, they go to another project, but it's usually very different. What we don't do is have a team that does super tall, or a team that does theaters, or a team that does parts. So you get to work on everything we have. And we like that. It's just richer. We find that we can transfer technology. We find that we can transfer processes. We work with artists, scientists, psychologists. Our head of sustainability is an ecologist, Dr. Chris Drew. And because of that, we do a lot of research. We publish a lot. In 2007, I'll show you the work we did back then with the decarb plan for Chicago, which is the bottom left-hand corner of the slide. The residency book, you'll see bits of it in the exhibit. It took us 5 years to do that research, which is really a carbon-based document on residential typologies in the Midwest, specifically from super tall all the way down to single family homes, 9 different typologies, kind of analyzing what that footprint is, why one typology is superior to another, or what is really the rationale behind those typologies. And because of COVID, and we're all hanging out at home, working and kind of enjoying our family lives and practicing from our kitchens and our living rooms, we took the opportunity to write 10 books. So over 2 years, we put together 10 books. We have published 6. We have 4 to go. And I think they're here outside. They range from the 15-year firm book to a mega tall structure book. We did one on facades, performance typologies, and because we finished the 2020 Al Wasl Pavilion in Dubai, which I'll show you tonight, we did a book specifically on that. We have planning on the way. We have one book on just ideas. I've been struggling with a book about the language of performance that I'm woefully behind, but I will take my time and hopefully work through that over the next few years. This idea of discovering form through performance is something that I have been playing with for years, since my first degree at University of Texas at Arlington. And it comes from a conversation about trying to understand why we do what we do. We are often asked to do amazing projects. We are taught to design buildings and cities. And yet, for some reason, we keep going back to these natural systems for all that we hold dear to ourselves and to our lives, and that we think are just gorgeous and beautiful. Most people will look at natural places or places of nature as beholden to be beautiful experiences more than they will at built environments. I took about 3 months when I graduated in Texas and pinned up all my stuff in a room at school and tried to figure out what the heck was it exactly that I was doing at the time. I wrote this thesis about this inherent opposition between nature and the built environment, and was trying to understand, what is this equation? On the one hand, even yesterday, I think, launched a SpaceX rocket, and we define ourselves as a species as successful many times through technology. The Romans invented concrete. We invent fire. We are sending rockets to Mars. We want to live on the moon. At the same time, we are connected very deeply to nature. We love it. We go camping. We go to the beach. We walk through forests. We even have little backyards with grass and fences that we cut and mow and manicure because we love our natural systems. And I just couldn't and still don't really understand what that relationship fully is. But the pursuit of the work is really a maturation of 17 years so far, to be honest, 30 years, of trying to relate natural systems to built environments and vice versa. And I'll try and explain how we actually think we're doing that. And I just want to tell you, and Carla knows this, we don't go around telling people that we know what we're doing. We have a process, and we are often very careful about what we proclaim to be an answer. We are simply a cog in a wheel that is moving through time, trying to connect what we think we have learned to what we hope we will understand in the future. A lot of these people in this room who are now at school here at TMU will hopefully see some of this, either throw it out or pick it up and run with it and figure it out and really go do something else with it. So we don't go around telling people that this is an answer. We simply say, this is our process. We'll start here. So when we started the firm, there were 5 of us. We had some cardboard boxes. We were in a little back room in Chicago, and we were all excited when the printer came because that big box gave us the conference room table. That was 2006, October. In 2007, we had enough work for 1,000 architects because we had won a ton of projects and we didn't know what to do. We actually employed other firms to help us do the work. One project was 10 million square feet. So we were lucky. In 2008, everything stopped. The economy crashed. All the projects went on hold. Dead silence. Fortunately, we were well protected financially. And so we had a bunch of people in the office and we didn't know what to do. We didn't like the idea of ballooning up so fast. So we took that as a little bit of a moment to correct ourselves. And we went from internally 250 people to about 100 people, and we've stayed there ever since. We've never gone back to that size. And so we have a process in the office and how we work to maintain our size because we like that connection to the people and the work. We like to get dirty, as we say, and we don't want to grow any bigger. At 2008, we took about 50 people and did this project. At the time, the mayor of Chicago had signed up for the 2030 challenge to remove 39 million metric tons of carbon from the city. Nobody knew what that meant. We went to City Hall, we asked the questions. No one could tell us what it meant, much less how they were going to do it. So we decided to try and figure this out. And we have a 280-page document book that we published at the time. And the first thing we did was try to get a hold of a physical dimension of space that we could look at, which for us was the loop in Chicago, which represented about 10% of the density of Chicago. So we took 3.9 million metric tons instead of 39 million metric tons and tried to figure out how we could remove that from the city. We quickly took the systems-based approach, and everything you see tonight is based on this idea of systems. So what we do is we unpack an idea around a city or a building or a typology, and then repack it to try and get mutually supporting or mutually conducive efficiencies. So what does the transit and mobility have to do with water? What does water have to do with the buildings? What does all of this have to do with community engagement? And just one thing to remember, as you all know, it's all about people. We can talk all we want about architecture. At the end of the day, it's all about people. So even though technologically we can do the math and spend $27 billion of solar photovoltaic fields or wind fields and take the city off the grid, it does absolutely nothing for the improvement of the city itself or those who inhabit it. We defined the core as this red loop here, which is our river, for those of you who know Chicago, and the front park. And at the time, our core was only 10% residential. And what we learned very quickly as we ran scenarios was that residential uses about 25% of the energy of office. And so obviously, the more mixed use environment you have, the better. But it just keeps going, right? So it's not just the energy component of it. The life of the city improves. The mailman is more efficient. The delivery logistics becomes more efficient. The infrastructure becomes more efficient. And so we began to think about how we could introduce residential into the core of Chicago. And some of this was actually done. We retrofitted 24 buildings at the time, and the city went on to do some of these retrofits and adaptive reuse projects over time. We have streets that had tunnels under them for coal delivery. So we utilized those for moving air and goods. And this project, which was Sears Tower, now Willis Tower, came to us through a client who wanted us to build a new hotel next door for a net zero energy hotel on the same site. We gracefully declined and said, we don't think we can do that because it just doesn't pencil out. However, what are you doing with the big guy? What are you doing with Willis? And to their credit, they'd been doing a lot with Willis. They'd been doing lighting, looking at the facades, but Sears Tower, Willis, was 1974, 4 million square feet, single glazed glass, heat by light at the time. When we did the analysis and we unpacked Willis, we found that we could repack that building and save massive amounts of energy and improve the quality of the environment inside the building. That energy from that one building was the equivalent of 4 hotels on that site. So we knew that the math was working from an energy standpoint. So we could have easily built 4 hotels. The equation around the economy of it was simple. When ComEd calls me up and says, hey, I understand you guys are adding a hotel next door. We need to upgrade the substation. We said, time out. Can we talk to you for a second about that? And we explained that we could retrofit the big building, bring the new building online without changing the substation. In fact, we might have enough energy saved for you to distribute elsewhere throughout the city. And so the question became, how do you feel about adding more customer base to your network without any cost to you whatsoever to your infrastructure? They like that because they spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year on infrastructure trying to upgrade density. But the question then became for us, how do you increase density and create this equation and not influence or impact the cost and the quality of life in the city? So we built this thing. This is a little parametric model that is now 14 years old. And it was just done for us to understand the interrelationships between these systems. So it's complex, too complex for us to understand. We're not mathematicians, but we realized very quickly that this kind of organic or parametric relationship between systems was critical. And the only way we could understand that is to build models that helped us do that. And today we work with people that are a lot smarter than we are that have models like this and help us run scenarios for the projects that we do, whether it's a building or a city or a nation. We landed here that we believe, obviously, that the existing building stock is absolutely critical to our future, that retrofits are absolutely a must. Retrofit first, build second, if you can. And at the same time, we could reposition the existing building stock and create value around that building stock. So it's not true necessarily that the new one is better than the old one. It's just not true. So that gave us an answer that we could actually increase development and reduce carbon at the same time. So all of a sudden, we're going around saying, hey, wait, density isn't really bad. Bad density is bad. But if you know what you're doing, you could actually densify and build and still be sustainable, which gave me a little bit of pause and hope that what we were doing just wasn't damaging everything we touched. So the question became, how do we actually pursue this as a practice? And today I can tell you that our practice, the average building efficiency in our practice is 66%. I think the AI average is 45%. And our goal is to keep pushing that if we can get to 80%. Now the question around embodied carbon came up. And we've done a lot of work on this in terms of, I mentioned the residency study that we did for 5 years, looked at the 9 different typologies. And I won't spend a lot of time on this, just to say that the answers might be obvious in terms of where the balance sits. So from a megatall to a single family home, the 2,000 single family homes on land versus one point tower with 2,000 units in it, less land, but you have massive amounts of concrete, massive amounts of infrastructure in the megatall. So the answer is somewhere in the middle, somewhere around 60 stories or so in a balanced equation. However, that's just the building. When you look at the equation around land use, and you realize that you can densify a structure and put a point tower on a piece of land and save that land and use it for something else, like food. So if we go back and take the idea of using a photovoltaic farm or a wind farm and covering hundreds of acres with that, which we still do. But if we didn't do that and we were doing it on the buildings and saving the land, that equation around food changes the entire carbon footprint. It's just a completely different story. We measured the mailman, the backyard fences, the snow plows, the cutting up the grass, everything we could over 5 years. We worked with engineers to give us data on concrete, wood, steel, and tested these 9 typologies and published this book. We use this information constantly as we test and dive into things like materials. So everybody talks about concrete and everybody talks about wood. And this is where this presentation ends, and you'll throw me out of the room because everybody talks about wood. Everybody loves wood. As I say, some of my best friends are wood. Don't get me wrong, but it's not a panacea. Why? Because you're not going to build your infrastructure out of wood. You're not going to build your roads out of wood. You're rarely going to build infrastructure for bridges out of wood. You're not going to build your core out of wood. And so even though wood is, as a material is good, it's dangerous to suggest that that's the answer. As I mentioned before, we don't believe in panaceas. We believe in a balanced equation. And if we can take something like concrete, which is the most prevalent material on the planet, and do better with concrete, we've got a much better chance of solving problems than suggesting that in Dubai, you're going to build your towers out of wood, because they're not. The problem is that we think about what we can do. Unfortunately, we're the ones exporting our knowledge to everywhere else, but they can't do that. It's just like offsets. We don't promote offsets because not everybody can buy a jungle in Brazil to offset their building. We also think it produces bad behavior, because if you can offset your problem, you're not really solving it. You're just kicking the can down the road. So we want to do the best job we can today. Simply, as far as we can take it, that's what we'll do. And sometimes the clients say, stop. We don't want to go that far. And sometimes they go, yeah, let's go. We did this study for a tech company in California who thought that their path to success was wood. It turned out we can create an equation around design for everything from daylighting to comfort to efficient buildings, and really look at how we can create scenarios that run models to tell you how to lower your carbon footprint. So this was a 350,000 square foot office building in California. And we found that we could run the equation to get to a net zero carbon, embodied carbon equation in about 7.9 years. What does that mean? That means that we're creating enough renewable energy on site. That means we have started with a passive design solution to use less energy. Although we talk about technology, we are not technology hounds. We actually are not. We like passive design first, and then bring the technology if you need it. If we can get your building to 50% efficiency, 60% efficiency without any technology whatsoever, just good rock solid design, you win. You want to get the rest of the way? Now we can talk about technological solution. Now, at the same time, we're not going to just simply apply that technology to the building we designed for you. We have that conversation with you up front. If you decide that's where you want to go, then we integrate that solution, because applied technology is also, we think, not the way to go. When we go to places like Dubai and are asked to look at the Expo in Dubai 2020, we apply the same systems. For Expo in 2020, we did the legacy master plan. We did the sustainable master plan, the architectural guidelines, and we were fortunate enough to win the centerpiece of that project in a competition, which is called the Al Wasl Plaza. It's a park and a trellis, and I'll tell you about that, with 5 little buildings around it. So once again, we unpack it and we repack it. But here's the thing. The Expo is thinking about the 6 months or so of the Expo. We reverse engineered it, designed a community, and then reverse engineered it into the Expo for 6 months. So we introduced the idea of where you would live, how you'd walk to work, where the schools might be, and what the density might be because of the pro forma around the future city, not the Expo. The Expo will do what it needs to do, but afterward, what does this place become? And I was there last week. And now they're in Expo City mode, or Dubai City mode, which is the expansion of the uses and the introduction of residential, education, business towards it. First thing we did was we increased the density. And we did that by taking the 2-story buildings around the center space and turning them into 11 stories. We have a flight cone. So we were limited, but 11-story buildings, 3 office, 2 hotel. The idea behind this is a revenue generation equation about the economy of the project itself. So the first thing we ask the client is, what is your pro forma? And if the client says, don't worry about it, trust us, we know what we're doing, we run like hell. Because the only way that our buildings are going to succeed is if they are economically viable. So when we talk about sustainability, we're talking about cultural sustainability, social sustainability, environmental sustainability, and economic sustainability. No one is going to do something incredible from a sustainable standpoint unless it makes economic sense. You can say they're going to do it, but they won't. And if they do it, they'll do it once. It's not a process by which they're going to repeat. And we have some clients that talk to us about this. And so those equations vary. First sketches on this idea for our Wassel was to put a park at the center of this district. So the story goes, Her Excellency Rima Hashmi, who was our client and has become a friend, was and is in charge of Expo. She asked me what I would put in the center of this space, and I say, a park. And she said, what? A park. Why are you telling me a park when everybody else is telling me to put a tower on this site? I said, because I think if you want to leave a legacy for your district and something for people, you would give them a park and you wouldn't privatize the most important space in this district. In addition to that, show me a dedicated formal park in Dubai that's usable throughout the day. Because most of the parks are leftover spaces, or if they're designed, you're occupied at night because of the temperature. It's very hot, obviously. So we came up with this idea. This is 130-meter diameter, 67-meter tall trellis that shades the park. She said, Gordon, you know that Sheikh Mohammed wants to put a tower here. I'm like, yeah. She goes, you want me to go and tell Sheikh Mohammed that he's wrong? I said, it sucks to be you. And she smiled at me. And I knew that when she smiled at me, we had this relationship. She understood. That lady is probably one of the smartest people, one of the bravest people I know. Never done a development before, 5 years in doing an expo, built this city at all odds, 24 million visitors, delivered it. And now she's in charge of the next transition. This trellis is a fiberglass fabric that transmits light. We built the park with SWA in the base of it. We scooped it out so that there is a bowl kind of vineyard concept for the space. The center is a stage that ascends up from below. So all the performers come from below and ascend up in the middle of this park. And at night, it transmits light. There are 252 projectors in this space. It just was, I think, a couple of months ago, entered and received by the Guinness Book of World Records as the world's largest outdoor immersive space. And those projectors came from Waterloo. The 252 projectors are in pods. Each one is about $300 and something thousand. They're water cooled. They talk to each other and they communicate back to Waterloo constantly. They talk to each other because if one goes down, the other one covers for it. It's a double curved surface. And so the mapping and engineering behind it was ridiculous. We had 30 different countries working on this project for 5 years. The pods that house the projectors are about the size of a quarter of this room. They're air cooled themselves. They're like little buildings. I'll show you them in a second. But the question about what the space could be was a tremendous effort by hundreds of people to deliver this for Expo 2020. And all the time we were told, not going to happen, can't do it, never going to work. Not true. It's also extremely sustainable. And I'll show you why in a minute. I don't want you to think that we're a bunch of calculating eggheads. We are. But at the same time, we're also trying to create beautiful places for people. hopefully we're obviously not the measure of that beauty. People are the measure of that beauty. And we hope that when we leave these things behind, they will be engaged for decades. So COP28, for example, if you saw that, this was the home for COP28 when the 198 presidents and dignitaries came from around the world. It's a transformational space. So because of its scale, we didn't want it to feel overwhelming throughout the day. We wanted it to be beautiful in the sunlight. So we actually designed it for shade and shadow. And then layered on top of that, the projection system to transform the space. We designed it for a 5-year-old little boy and girl, and we designed it for a 95-year-old man and woman. It's universally accessible, which means that there's no space in this that's over 4.5% or 4.95% slope. There are no handrails. It's completely walkable and navigable. In the daytime, the light transmits through the fiberglass and creates an environment that we hope people find beautiful. The 5 little buildings around it hug it and protect it. Protect it from dust storms, they protect it from the harsh sun. They create an environment that kind of braces it. Those little buildings are designed through a whole system of carbon and energy use for daylighting, water, efficiency. They have all been sold and they are now occupied. And that carbon effort walked through 3 years of design and then all of the construction. So we had 5 people on site working through the construction to work with the contractors that when they changed something or wanted to do a substitution, we could then run the carbon analysis on that substitution to make sure that the goal was still being met. Because what happens is that you run a calculation on a target, you walk away, and then it changes. And we don't want that. Here are some stats. We are producing probably about 70, we're using about 73% less water in these buildings. The rest of it you can just read in terms of energy and carbon. But the reason I pick on the water is because that to me is one of the most critical aspects of design and probably one of the least smallest focuses in design because we have an abundance of it, especially here. We don't even think about it. Just turn on the tap and there it is. No problem. I grew up in Jamaica. I was there a couple weeks ago with my wife, a month ago with my wife, and we were talking to one of the ladies that we know there that live up in the hills. She has to walk and go get water. She has no water in her house. Doesn't have a well. Has to pay something like $2,000 a month, Jamaican, to get a truck to bring water to her house. That might not sound like a lot of money to you or us, but for her, it's huge. Why is that? How are we doing this? When I ran the equation around Dubai at the time, they were spending $5 billion in desalination plants. And I asked the group, I said, what are you doing that's so sustainable with desalination plants? They go, oh, no, we have photovoltaics on all the desalination plants. Who cares? Of course you can put photovoltaics on a desalination plant. Who cares? The problem is, why do you have a desalination plant? That's the real question. So how do we stop or put your money somewhere else instead of building desalination plants? And one way to do it is use less water. Imagine if you could write a standard where all the buildings in Dubai were at 73% less water. How much money would you need to spend on desalination? These are the kind of economics that we bring to our clients. The embedded carbon, we worked with a group from Venice on the steel. When we do carbon analysis, it's life cycle carbon. So we're looking at all the material sourcing, all the construction, all of the operational characteristics, and hopefully we end up with a place that people love. 24 million people walk through this building because it was an exhibition. And today it's the center of the district. And now they're densifying that district around it. I sat in this pool. This is the only reason I show you this image. I sat in this pool the night they lifted the crown of Al Wasl Plaza. Took 36 hours and 17 jacks to lift that steel into place. I was up there by myself. It was obviously under construction, so it looked nothing like this. But it was a moment that I believed was, for me, a beautiful moment because it was one of the largest steel lifts ever. And it took 36 hours. So you're up there by yourself just watching this thing like paint drying. But the technology behind that was fantastic. We also do things like this. This is Jeddah Tower. When the client comes to us and asks us to design the next world's tallest, again, we ask about the performa. And what a lot of people don't necessarily understand about these buildings is that while Burj Khalifa, for example, can net 200 million US dollars a year off the observation deck, just 4 stories, and pay for itself in 5 years. Not all buildings can do that. The equation, though, around the super talls are often the land around it and the development around it. So especially in the Middle East and China, these projects are often part of a much larger city plan. And when the land value increases around them, that's where the developer gets the economics around the city. In this particular case, the world's tallest is now designed to be over 1 kilometer, so about 20% taller than Burj Khalifa, primarily residential with some office and hotel. But as you know, the wind design criteria on super talls is the governing criteria for super talls: movement, acceleration, torque. So we spend a lot of time tuning the form. So when we talk about the formal language or the language of performance in Al Wasl, that form around acoustics, comfort, microclimates in the bowl, the landscape, shade, protection from dust storms, that's where that comes from. Here, it's about tuning this building for behavior characteristics, acceleration, torque, and wind movement. Comfort and the psychology behind comfort is critical in these buildings. You don't want to be in your apartment and see the bathtub water sloshing around on the 130th floor. Not a nice feeling. So wind tunnel tests and studies are always critical for us, regardless of what we're doing. And sometimes when we do these things, we get asked to do things like this. So we're in a meeting with the sheikh, and he says, I'd like to put a helicopter pad up here. And we're all shaking it. We're all going, no. And he looks over at his guys, and his eyes go, yeah, no, absolutely, no problem. And we're like, no, please don't do that. So now we have this request and directive that his guys need to follow, which we know is not a good idea. How do you navigate a bad idea with a client? What we did is we put the majlis. So the majlis is where they greet their guests and meet and hold kind of conversations. We put the majlis at that floor. And we explained that this would be the world's tallest majlis, and that you can walk out on that floor and see your kingdom from that platform. No more helicopter pad. Now, how do you do that? Wind mitigation. So if you look at these things, you'll know or you'll understand that they're stratified. So the wind is cooler. Higher up you go. We farm the wind with the building from outside to offset the cooling needs from the building. We farm it from the top, circulate it through, move it out through the base. The temperature is dropping, I think, about 1 or so degrees every 100 meters or 10 degrees every 1,000 meters, something like that. But up here, the wind will either blow you off or suck you off that floor. So the wind mitigation around the science of comfort and the psychology of it. So on the one hand, we might put you in a position where psychologically you're uncomfortable, but we don't want you to be physically uncomfortable. We don't want you to be afraid. We want you to be wary, but not scared. Depends on what we're designing for. right? So here, what we did is we pulled the glass up. It's about 12 feet over your head and worked with the wind tunnel guys to understand how we can create comfortable environments out there that won't create negative pressure to pull you off the building. And negative pressure is something that happens to buildings all the time in terms of sucking glass out of the building or sucking snow off of your roof and onto the neighbor next door. It happens. We've seen that happen on other projects. Knock wood, well, not ours. But the idea behind how you tune these buildings or adjust the form, so you'll notice it's split at the top. It doesn't come to a single apex. There are 3 legs. It's a tripod, so it's very stable, very efficient, but they actually are not accelerating at the same time. They don't come to one point. They come to 3 different points, and that's to confuse the wind. We like texture. We like variety. We will do everything we can to confuse the wind so it doesn't get organized and doesn't create the vortices that start the building rocking from side to side. That's what we don't want. In this particular building, because it's a concave body, we talk about reflectivity and heat intensity, calculated that we were actually generating a tremendous amount of heat off the angle of incidence of the sun down onto the ground plane where people are walking in. And you might remember a building in London that cooked a Jaguar. You remember that? Guy going to the bank, parked his Jaguar outside, went to the bank, came back out, toast. They didn't understand the impact of their architecture on their surroundings. Here, we checked it. We understood that we were generating a tremendous amount of heat at the base. So we increased the lobby and put a photovoltaic farm on the roof of the lobby. Now, the heat that we're generating is actually creating power for the building itself. We're looking at ecosystems or loops. That's what we're looking for. Balanced equations around the ecosystem of the building that you're designing. And hopefully you create a decent lobby while you're doing it. Hopefully this building will be completed. It's now back on track, we hope, to get completed. We'll see. But a lot of people say to us, oh, you know, so sorry that building didn't get built. That's a shame. Sorry. You must be very upset about that. Like Masdar headquarters, for example, was never built. Sorry you lost that. Sorry you must have. We're not sorry. Because the work that we do that goes into the science behind that project, we use it again and again and again. Nothing is wasted. A lot of people I've heard in practice say things like, I never learned anything about that in school. Oh crap. I learned everything in school that I use every day. Everything. There's all kinds of stuff. We were just talking about it here and talking about some of the courses we took here. I'll tell you one thing about this school that helped me when I went to Texas. When I went to Texas, I understood how to draw a building section because of this school. I understood what materials meant or how they worked or how to put something together. And I had a first project. I drew a section of the building and one drawing. And a professor saw it and said, asked who did that, said, how would you like to be a teaching assistant? I said, sure, I'd love to be a teaching assistant. That doesn't sound like a big deal. But when your student fees go from international student rates to in-state student rates, at the time it was $10,000, which again may not seem like a big deal, but for me it was a big deal. From $10,000 to $760, yahoo. The knowledge around your work has tremendous value. And I'm going to tell you that we argue today, and will always argue, that the people in this room are the ones that can take a blank piece of paper and create tremendous value with a simple idea. That idea is worth, in some cases, billions of dollars. Value your work. Don't give it away. And one of the things that used to really tick me off when I was in university was students that would go and work for famous firms over the summer for free. The law students were going and getting, you know, baseball tickets, clothing allowances, $90,000 a year. We were fighting for $25,000 a year. don't give your work away. It's extremely valuable. You mightn't realize what you're learning here, but my advice to you is take a very close look at what you're doing and understand the context in which you're doing it in, because it has a tremendous amount of value. This project, Central Park Tower, now the world's tallest, Gary Barnett, Expo, took him 15 years to assemble the land, asked us to do this, very different typology from a residential standpoint, about 8,000 square foot floor plates. And the thing about this building, which is unique, is the shift. So I just brought this one to show you if you don't know this project. So go back a second to this image. Nordstrom occupies the first 5 floors. Took them 29 years to choose this site. They put $1 billion in retail in Manhattan at the time. The building shifts. Why? Because when you have a site and you put a tower on top of it and you run a tower through a podium, it undermines the entire efficiency of that podium. The elevators come through, the stairs come through, it goes all the way down into the basement. The podium becomes horribly inefficient. So we shifted the building to the east. The other nice thing about shifting the building to the east is you see that image on the left-hand side and the building in front of us. So we are in the second row to Central Park. We're not in the first row. So you go to the theater, the guy comes, sits in front of you, you're in the second row, sits in front of you, he's got this huge hat on, and now you can't see anything. And you spend the whole night doing this. They had the first row, a competing developer. And when we came up with this idea with Gary Barnett, we simply shifted around them and got the first row view of Central Park. Gary loved that. It's not a simple move. A 290-foot in the air cantilever over the neighboring parcel. Lots of complex issues. I won't go into all of the relationships with the neighbors and how we solve these problems, and with the city as well. Needless to say, we solved them, including things like reflectivity into the art school next door, or lack thereof, with a zinc facade of a soft linen finish. But this structure now creates tremendous value. And we didn't think, to be honest with you, that it was going to be feasible, because it's an expensive idea. It's an expensive move. Barnett calls us back in a week, said we penciled it out. We're good. We can do it. That's how this building comes to get realized, because the retail becomes more valuable. The units become more valuable because of the views. Majority of these are sold now. So I went to the opening of the restaurant on the 100th floor about a year or so ago. And to my pleasant surprise, I go in the lobby to go up to the party. And there's a 14-year-old kid with his violin case, and his little brother with his little Game Boy. And a young lady comes in. She's about 16. She's got her books. And they're kind of looking at me like, what are you doing here? And I said, hello. Do you guys live here? They're like, yeah, because they're told not to talk to strangers. And I realized after I went upstairs that there are all these families that live in the building, and all the kids get together and play in the building, and they walk to school through Central Park. And all of a sudden, all the things that people told us weren't going to happen are happening, because the building kind of makes sense. Now, it's obviously an extremely expensive building, but those families can afford it. But what we were afraid of, and what we were told might happen, is that this was all going to be absentee purchases. Not the case. We want people to live in our buildings. We want kids to live in our buildings. We like the life of the building. Nothing is better than watching people use the projects. This project we talked about last week. This was a master plan that we did in Dubai many years ago for DMCC. This project just got completed, and this is a 340-meter tower called Uptown Tower, mixed use, office, hotel, and residential. And this just got finished about a few months ago, and is doing very, very well in Dubai. I just show you that because not a lot of people have seen this building. The notion of integrating photovoltaics in the facade, we did an FKI about 14 years ago, Federation of Korean Industries in Seoul, Korea. You might recognize this building, the facade of this building. I brought it to show you because we're going to talk about 160 Front Street a little bit. This was the first edition, the 15-degree shift in the vision plane to reduce the angle of incidence on the facade to reduce heat load. And at the same time, what we found was that we were getting incredible kind of views out of this building. So no longer are you perpendicular to your facade on the inside. You are now able to lean forward and occupy space outside of the slab, beyond the slab. We like architectural moves that have spatial consequence. We want you to have an experience that's, again, a little different, but hopefully safe. This building generates tremendous amount of energy for itself, and at the time had an incentive for 7 times payback the amount of energy that you got on this project. The top roof is a garden and a farm and has been very successful over the last 14 years. We do residential projects like this one in Miami, same kind of process around experience. This plan is really tapered with the sharpest point towards the water. So no matter if you're in the rear units, you're still getting water views. And this one is currently under construction in Miami. This client has come back to us. We did the architecture and interiors for this job. And this client has come back to us for 2 more projects. Let's talk about these last few here, and then I'll call it a day. This project has not been published yet. It's been announced, but not published. It's for a client called Magnum Properties in Cairo. It's in the new capital. And this client asked us if we could calculate a life cycle net zero carbon on an office building, which is about 47 stories. It's about 1 million square feet. Again, we ran the equation around the possibilities of that. But the problem with this particular building is that we don't have the surface area for the renewable energy. So we put the photovoltaics in the facade. I'll show you that in a second. Right now, the blue graph that you're looking at, the first 3 bars are the output of facades that are currently out there on the planet. The biggest outputs, we're the far right. So we're producing 4 or so times what the next person is producing. We ran the carbon equation, again, life cycle embodied carbon, no offsets. So we introduced liquid hydrogen into this building. There is an LOHQ, a liquid hydrogen system that is a truck delivery for hydrogen that then generates energy in the basement of the building. First time it would be implemented into a building. And that is fed by the photovoltaics. So again, we create a loop system around it. The photovoltaics are BIPV embedded in the glass, laminated. So it's not a shelf. FKI was a shelf. It's not a shelf because the shelf collects dust. And in this environment, the dust would kill you. So when we run the life cycle equation around carbon and we think about the maintenance of the building, we don't have to build the extra aluminum. We don't have to build the support for the photovoltaics. We keep it flat and simple. This is a single loaded building because the client wanted certain views, which is fine. We just have to deal with it. And so what we did is that we laced the core with photovoltaics. Core is on the west side, harsh west sun. And then we introduced the embedded photovoltaics as a kind of mashrabiyah type pattern in the office space. So we're diffusing the light, we're creating shade, and we're generating power. What we're looking for is 4 or 5 things that one system can do. When we do that, we get an architectural expression that is definitely a little different. You may like it, you may not. The question is, does it have value? And Forbes International saw this project and asked to put their name on this building. So Forbes International has never put their name on a building before. This is now the Forbes International Tower. We took this project to Davos last year and presented it at the World Economic Forum. Got very well received. And now Forbes is asking, where else can we do this? The economics around it are very aggressive. So we have to work very carefully with the client, Magnum, and explain to lenders what the equation is around the economics so that they can understand what their equation is around the financing of the building, because they're different. The upfront costs are more, but the payback is there. We do a lot of fun things in the office. We are constantly integrating spaces for people to use in our towers or environments where they can have different types of experiences. And we try to do that here. So this, you might know or not know, is 160 Front Street. Almost moved in, finished, topped out, right here Front and Simcoe for Cadillac Fairview. 13-year project. 13 years ago, we started that project. So you got to have patience to do these things. The evolution of that project was very interesting to us. And Cadillac flew to Seoul, Korea to see FKI, the folded plate facade with the photovoltaics. And they understood it and liked it. So we had introduced this idea and they said, well, where can we see it? So we said we did one similar in Seoul, and so they went to see it. This building is doing a number of things. So people often ask, why the heck does it look like that? Why is it shaped like that? Why is the form like that? So we were told, and for better or for worse, that this site is kind of on the edge of the downtown core. So you go a little more west and you feel like you're leaving the core. So it's kind of an edge condition. So we put the high point of the tower on the west corner. We took the tower and pulled it out of the podium for the same reasons I explained to you at Central Park Tower, and put the building on the corner. And we shaped the building so that it's facing or gesturing toward Union Station and the intersection at Yonge. So it's directional. That is its profile. It's narrow at the base and then gets wide and then gets narrow again. And the reason that is because urbanistically, we wanted to increase the sidewalk space on Simcoe. So it doesn't just come straight down. It's shaped like this and then it tapers in. So you get a wider sidewalk. However, the city of Toronto has very strict guidelines on wind comfort levels at the pedestrian level. And so the reason the building is shaped like that and textured like that is twofold. One is to shed that downward force of the wind, so it does not come straight down on Simcoe, and it's mitigated by shedding it outward, which it does. And the second was to create texture on the facade to once again help confuse the wind and create a little more efficiency in the structure. At the same time, that building, because of the 10-degree slope of the facade, is mitigating a little bit of glare. And so it's much more comfortable inside for the viewer than a flat glass. Why is that? You ever been to the airport and seen the towers that are at the airport for watching the planes come in? They're all shaped like 15 degrees. The reason that is because they can't afford to have glare on the surface of that glass. Also, they want to see the tarmac, so they're looking down. So these buildings, you can look out, but you can also look down. It's very rare to look down when you're in an office building. The other reason it's like that to mitigate glare is because everybody that we talk to wants floor-to-ceiling glass in their office building. Everybody. This is what the tenants want. This is what the clients want. We want floor-to-ceiling glass. They move in, and what do? Pull the blinds, because nobody can see their laptop because of the glare. So the question becomes, how do I get you floor to ceiling glass and not have you shut this thing down and be dark in the dark all day long? I want you to open your windows. I want you to see your city. I want you to enjoy those views because some of these buildings have spectacular views. A part of this project that I thought was just fascinating was the lighting. I don't know if you've heard about the lighting or seen it, but I thought this was very interesting. So we're asked to, we run the analysis, we do all the heat gain calculations on the facade, we do all the good stuff we're supposed to do on this building. And it works pretty well. We have a couple of balcony terraces at the mid and at the third points. That's to kind of allow or provide outdoor terraces for the tenants. So we want you to step outside again if you're comfortable in doing that. Clearly very safe. The notion of tapering the building was also part of the heritage relationship that we had to kind of reveal that heritage piece and kind of celebrate it on the corner. And then here you see the facade and the structure that we used for the fin, and then integrated the lighting into that sawtooth corner. So in the daytime, the fin holds the sunlight and it's white. You can see it if you drive by it. At the top, we introduced a number of different systems to create a high volume space of about 30 or so plus feet, which is a wonderful space. And then we created this transitional lighting scheme on the facade. The tenant, TD, wanted a signature statement. We wanted it to be a little more artful, so not just a sign. So we integrated this lighting system. Of course, the lighting went through a whole series of tests, caused a lot of consternation in the public because people thought it was going to be this moving, gyrating rainbow of colors. That's not the case. And now it's settled down, I think, at about 50% of its intensity to create hopefully a much more elegant solution. The question became, and I heard this dialogue from Chicago, what is happening to our city? What is happening to Toronto? Does this mean that we're going to become like Hong Kong? Are we going to become like Hong Kong Harbor and now all the buildings are going to get lit up? I am fascinated by this conversation. Maybe, I don't know, but it seems to me that these types of moments in time are very important to the dialogue around what the city will become and what really you guys want Toronto to be. I was fascinated by the fact that lighting that building like that could create such consternation. I'm not apologizing for it. I'm just fascinated by it. I think that, cities change and they grow and cultures shift. And sometimes, because of the jobs that we're asked to do, the tenants and the clients are asking us to just push that thing just a little bit. Sometimes it's on purpose, sometimes it's not. But the notion of putting yourself out there at the risk of getting beat up, I think is a good thing. I don't think you should ever be afraid of that. I think that's part of your job. And if you're not doing that, then you have to ask yourself the question, what exactly is it? What are you doing really? Are you doing the same thing you did last week and last year because it's easy, because it's safe? Or do you just want to try and do something that's carefully calculated, not dangerous, not irresponsible, but hopefully just moving the needle a little bit? We try to do that. It'll be interesting to see what happens to Toronto over the years. As part of that discussion, I just want to close with this. The projects that we're doing now, the building projects, are contributing to the grid in ways that we weren't able to do 10, 15 years ago. And we are arguing that we could reposition the buildings as infrastructure. Why? Because if you look at this massive barrier reef we call cities that we all live in and move around in, if you were to harness the energy out of those buildings and return them back to the grid or the infrastructure, we already know that we can have massive impacts on that. 70% of the planet's going to be living in cities in what, another 20 years, 30 years? We know this. But we also know that the equation around the energy from an economic standpoint is enormous. We can save energy and redistribute it and shift it. In Dubai, the client told us that we saved them 400 million US dollars when we rewrote the sustainable platform because we reversed engineered the infrastructure. The buildings are performing better, so you need to build less infrastructure. The stuff you don't see. One of the traps I think we have is that we're busy looking at the buildings when we should be looking at the cities, because the infrastructure that's beneath the street is a huge contributor to embodied carbon. The buildings can help it, but it's often somebody else's job. I don't think it is. I think that we sit at the intersection of every discipline that it takes to build something in a city. We talk to everybody. We talk to civil, we talk to plumbers, we talk to financial guys, we talk to owners, we talk to users, we talk to everybody. That is a huge responsibility. And if you're a practicing architect with a firm, your insurance proves it. So you know that the risk is there. With large-scale projects or even small-scale projects, we're arguing that we would like to influence the way that we think about infrastructure through technology in order to improve the environment. When we started our firm in 2006, there's no such thing as an iPhone. 2/3 of the group's like, what? That's impossible. What? Well, iPhones? Yeah, Blackberries. Look at the changes that have happened in the last 15, 17 years. Circular economies around zero waste, embodied carbon. 2 years ago, we were asked to contribute to the infrastructure plan in the United States. We were one of 5 groups. We were the building side. So we unpacked the United States. We wrote a 380-page book about it, submitted it as part of the infrastructure bill. So they took some, threw some out. But nonetheless, what we were learning was about looking at things like the highway system, Amazon's system, first tier, second tier, third tier cities, townships, villages, healthcare, affordable housing. How do you affect these things? By understanding how the entire system of a country works. There are some countries we work in that are about the size of this city, like Jamaica. There are other countries, obviously, that are massive. But the notion that your work on a daily basis through your architecture can influence a nation or change the way that we think about infrastructure, which is a huge effort, is now, I think, something that we want to pursue. I'm just going to leave you with this. We're teasing you in that exhibit with the model that TMU built about Toronto. Toronto, we understand, we think we understand, is going through a huge growth spurt and will for decades to come. At least the data we're seeing is not slowing down really. What are you going to do with all these nice people? You have created a beautiful city, a fantastic environment to live. I think one of the most beautiful cities anywhere. You are outpacing cities like New York. You have a very stable environmental kind of city, great public spaces, beautiful waterfront. And all of a sudden, you're going to have to densify it and densify it and densify it. You could do what London did, drew a ring around their city and infilled it, or you could connect to all your neighboring suburbs and sprawl it. But our 2 cents is that you should take a very close look at the carbon plan for your city and think about it in terms of 100 years or more. Run the scenarios in 2 directions, upstream and downstream, and get the data to help you understand how it is exactly that you want to grow. It's not simple, but we think it's a worthwhile equation. A lot of the projects we have right now are practicing this and actually doing it. We're still trying to push the envelope a little bit, but I know that a lot of people in this room, a lot of the students in this room will come up with some pretty bright solutions. I'm pretty confident of that. I want to thank you for your time and your patience. I'll just leave you with that. And since you have no questions, we can go for drinks.
Maybe one or two questions. Is there? Anyways, please raise your hand if any questions. Or is it really drink time?
Drinks.
One in the back. There you go.
Sorry, thank you. That was an amazing presentation. Sorry, your last slide there, 2100. It was the
Yeah.
concept of urban agriculture. Is that something you could possibly unpack as to what the possible vision is there?
Yeah. So in the exhibit, I'm just teasing you with this slide. In the exhibit, we started to talk about steps that we think you could take to unpack the city and repack it the way that we have with other places. I think that's a worthwhile effort. I think the value of real estate and the value of open space and the quality of life that you want to maintain in the city, which right now is pretty good, but you can see the density shifting. I think it's something you're going to want to try to protect. The question is, how do you do it? And then turn around and house all these people that are coming to Ontario and then coming to Toronto. You know, we as a species have a habit of seeing something we love, gravitating towards it, and in the process of doing that, we absolutely just destroy it. We see something we like, we move in, we build on it, and it's gone. And I don't want to see that happen to Toronto. I don't think it has to happen. I think you can learn a lot from other parts of the world, like the United States. I think you have an industrial waterfront that is extremely valuable from a real estate standpoint, but maybe just as valuable or more valuable from an open space concept standpoint. You have a very rich waterway system. You're on the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes economy is, I think, is the same as the EU. If you take Toronto all the way around to Chicago, it's about that kind of value. And we've done studies on the Great Lakes economy. And now in Chicago and Indiana, we're looking at huge systems that work from Illinois through to Michigan, and would love to see Toronto step up and take a look at your carbon future. We're not saying we should do it. I'm saying you should do it. And I think when you look at the academics or academia and you look at the ideas that are moving through some of the universities and schools these days, I think that is a very interesting conversation to have. And I'm going to say that I don't know this for sure, but I'll bet the city is interested in it because they're the ones dealing with this.
Any other questions?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to, at one point you said early on that in the end, it's all about people in the final analysis, you know, it's all about people. And it just suddenly occurred to me, I promised Lisa I wasn't going to say anything, but obviously you're in Chicago, which is the home of Louis Sullivan, the tall office building reconsidered, the invention of the skyscraper. He was into ornament. That was going to be my question, but now I realize his last book, you know, he died poor and homeless. Louis Sullivan did. He died poor and homeless. And his last book is called Democracy. And I think I was just doing some on ESG,
Yeah,
which
sure.
I didn't really, what is it? Just yet another acronym.
That's
But the middle
that's
of it is the social component
Yes.
of environmentalism. And I
Yes.
think you've tried to give good emphasis to it. But we have a problem of gentrification and divided
Yeah.
wealth. And what are some of the best initiatives that you've seen in looking at the big picture to ensure that what's being delivered is going to benefit everybody?
So there have been a variety of projects, some of which we've been involved with, some of which we have not, that really talk about putting either development or technology in the hands of local groups or people that under other circumstances have no access to it. A lot of times it's around water and things that are just needed for life. Power, you know. In Jamaica, that's a big conversation, you can imagine. In Chicago, it's a conversation. We have seen initiatives for projects that stimulate that kind of behavior, but to be honest with you, the best solutions we have seen are ones where, I hate to say it, have an economic solution around the local community that can develop their own process to solve those problems. At COP28, I got into a lot of trouble because, with all due respect, I just saw everybody going around asking for funding. Fund me, fund me, fund me. That's a very precarious position to be in, I think, because if that's your only solution, you are beholden to others. What we are arguing, or hope to argue, is that by providing vehicles or platforms where communities can survive on their own and help solve their own problems, like water systems or power or healthcare, they're much better off. So we've seen some of that. I wouldn't say there's never enough of it. But we're much more interested in sharing knowledge and going into communities and teaching. For us, a lot of the places that we work in, they have no idea what we're talking about. Zero. And sometimes they just don't want to hear it. But our most successful projects are where we always work with locals. Always. And when we go in, what we're trying to do is leave behind an intellectual property that then, when we're long gone, they can practice. So for example, Kazakhstan, we spawned photovoltaic companies. We wrote laws on codes for insulation and quality of environments that people could live in. We did an entire neighborhood of middle income and low income housing that then got scooped up as part of the Expo. In that community, we did schools, dentist office, barbershop, the things you need for life. We have developments that we're seeing all over, and often we ask, where's the supermarket? And when we did the adaptive reuse in Chicago, along with the residential that I showed you to infill and do the adaptive reuse, we introduced things like supermarkets. You'll notice in the plans, we always have education and community engagement as part of the policy. So publishing those books and educating students or educating kids around how they can become sustainably minded, and I mean that in terms of self-sufficiently sustainable, is a big deal for us. And we like that. I don't know if I answered your question completely, but it's a good one and an important one. We're not the policymakers, but we push policymakers all the time. We like to work with leaders of countries or leaders of businesses because we want them to understand what we're trying to say. Yeah, last week I was in Dubai and a guy said, is anyone listening to you? I said, I don't know. I hope so. But there are a lot of people talking. The work you're doing is very valuable around these conversations. We as a practice or a profession, we have to find ways to influence the most powerful people out there. We like to work at the top. We're always working with the locals, but we need to go educate the top.
One, maybe a very short question. Make this the last one.
When it comes to super tall buildings, they are monuments like Sagrada Familia is for Barcelona. And they belong, they define the city. And I think maybe the land might belong to a developer, but the skyline, the city owns the skyline. So we are not designing for the developer. We are not designing for the tenants. We are designing for the city and its history. So we should, I think the responsibility is to solve a problem for the city. And aesthetically, it needs to be also nice, like good. And how do we define aesthetics? When the building is going to communicate to the city, it needs to be in harmony with the city, right? It doesn't need to be necessarily interesting. It doesn't need to realize the whims and dreams of the developer. And it shouldn't reflect the subjective perception of the architect, right? Because millions of generations are going to see this as their skyline. It's in the background of all the selfies, right? And how should we solve this problem? Are there any rules that we need to follow to speak the same language to the city? Architectural rules, like proportions, like basic rules that we need to at least confine ourselves within those rules, or it is basically subjective, or we should work with the developer, just come up with new interesting ideas. We are not repeating the same design each time. We just have the surprise effect. Which one should we follow? Or we have guideline that we can really explain.
Well, I can't tell you what to do. The only thing I know for sure is that things will always change. I think that you always have a responsibility, especially for super talls or high rise, you know, in terms of the dialogue with the skyline, the mid-range, and also obviously the ground plane. What we do, which we didn't really talk about tonight, but we could, is majority of the time, I would say maybe all of the time these days, we never occupy the top of the building with the mechanical, or if we do, we don't occupy all of the top of the building. We often are pushing the developers or the owners to have occupiable space at the top of the building, especially if it can be publicly accessible, because those are opportunities to create incredible moments at the skyline level. In terms of aesthetics and proportions, you will choose what you think is aesthetically proportional and beautiful. I think the worst thing we could do is create a prescription that this is the answer and this is what everybody should do. To be honest with you, I'd absolutely hate that. And if you gave me a prescription that this is what we should do, the first thing I would do is throw it out, because that's just the way I am. I'm not going to subscribe to sameness. I just don't like it. I think we need to change. I think they need to be different. Harmony is a different story. You know, we're all different, but hopefully we can occupy a space and be harmoniously involved. On Al Wasl, they told us it was all about communication. This place was going to be a hub, tens of thousands of people were going to be in there at any time, and it was about convening conversation. Oh, really? What do you mean by that? Well, we want people to come there and talk to each other. Yeah, but they're from all over the world. They actually don't even speak the same language. What do you mean they're going to talk to each other? The emotive experience of that space, and you can see it, you can even feel it when you're in it. You'll see people look at each other and just smile. They're communicating, but they're not talking to each other, not physically talking to each other, but they're communicating. So if you think about the buildings in a city and you think about them behaving in a harmonious manner to each other and having respect for each other, they don't have to be the same. They just have respect for each other. That's what I think.
Thank you. So thank you very much for that. I think we'll make that the end so that you can get to drinks. I think there's a student somewhere in the audience. Binta, are you here? Binta's going to give thanks from the studio.
So on behalf of the student body and the staff community, we'd like to thank you for coming up from Chicago and doing this presentation here. Your lecture was a great reminder that learning does not stop just from our classrooms. You've also reminded us that architecture is not just about design, it's about people, about use and resilience. And the philosophy that you've shown, being form follows performance, is very intriguing to me, very intriguing to the students, as I've seen many note taking. So it's something we'll take with us to our classrooms and our studios. So thank you for that.
Thanks. Thank you. I just have a few closing remarks, if that's okay. That was an amazing lecture. Thank you so much, and very interesting answers to the questions. As always, we have to thank all of the staff and technicians who make this all possible. Thank you very much for that. I'm just going to finish with one note so this was the third lecture, I guess, for this term. The final lecture, unless something surprising happens, will be 2 weeks' time, I think, on March 28th. It's with Matthew Hickey of Two Row Architects. So please make sure to come for that. It's going to be amazing. And I must say, this has been an amazing year. We've had great lectures all the time, and we're very lucky to have that. So thank you very much and have a good evening.